Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The mist dispersed slowly, as though reluctant to reveal the secrets it concealed. Harry Potter felt the cold stone floor touch his cheek and tried to remember where he was. The last thing he could recall was the gleaming silver artifact shaped like a serpent devouring its own tail, which they had discovered in the dark wizard hideout near Norfolk. The artifact pulsed with greenish light, and when Harry reached out his hand towards it, now he lay on a floor that was both unfamiliar and strangely familiar. Stone slabs, cold and smooth, smelled of dampness and something else, a scent that evoked memories of dungeons. Harry slowly rose, feeling slightly dizzy, and looked around. He found himself in a room he had never seen before, yet which seemed painfully familiar. Dark stone walls were adorned with ancient tapestries depicting serpents intertwined in complex patterns. Green light streamed softly through tall, narrow windows, creating the illusion of an underwater world. Bronze lamps hung from chains across the ceiling, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Slytherin dormitory," whispered Harry, feeling something cold slide down his spine. But this was impossible. He had never lived in Slytherin, never slept beneath these green coverlets, never fallen asleep to the conversations of other Slytherins about blood purity and the dark arts. And yet, his hands knew instinctively where his bed was located, forth from the left of the entrance, with a view of the lake through a narrow window. His feet carried him there of their own accord, where on the nightstand lay spectacles, exactly like those he wore. Beside them lay a wand, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches supple. Harry took the wand with trembling fingers. It was warm to his touch, responding to his magic as though it had always belonged to him. But this was impossible. He remembered the day he had received this wand from Ollivanders, remembered how Tom Riddle had purchased his wand from the same phoenix. "Potter, you're finally awake?" Harry spun around sharply. In the dormitory doorway stood Draco Malfoy, but not the Draco he knew. This Draco was smiling, not with a malicious grin, not a mocking grimace, but with a genuine, friendly smile. His platinum hair was slightly tousled, his robes unbuttoned, and in his eyes shone affection. "Draco." Harry instinctively stepped back, gripping his wand tighter. "What an odd reaction," Draco frowned, though the smile didn't leave his face. "You look as though you've seen a ghost. Although, considering we live in a castle full of phantoms, that's not such a strange reaction after all." He approached closer, and Harry noticed that Draco moved with the ease of someone accustomed to his presence. The way close friends move, people who trust one another. "You missed breakfast," continued Draco, settling on the edge of Harry's bed as naturally as though he did this every day. "Professor Snape was asking about you. Said if you're feeling poorly again, you should go to Madame Pomfrey." At the mention of Snape, something warm stirred in Harry's chest, a feeling that was utterly foreign to him. In his world, Snape had been a complicated figure, a man whom he had eventually understood and forgiven, but never someone who would show fatherly concern for his health. "Snape, worries?" asked Harry in a weak voice. Draco looked at him strangely. "Of course he worries. You know how he feels about you. Sometimes I think he loves you more than his own son, if he had one." Draco laughed. "Though after you saved him from that curse last month, I'm not surprised." Saved Snape? Harry remembered nothing of the sort. In his memories, Snape had died from Nagini's bite in the Shrieking Shack, died whilst passing his memories of Lily to Harry. "Harry?" Draco's voice became worried. "You really don't look well. Perhaps you should go to Pomfrey after all." "No, I'm fine." Harry sat back on the bed, trying to gather his thoughts. "Just had a strange dream." "About what?" Harry looked at Draco, at his open, concerned face, at the hand he extended to touch his forehead, checking for fever. This touch was so natural, so habitual, that Harry felt something painfully tighten in his chest. "I dreamed," he began cautiously, "that I wasn't in Slytherin, that you and I were enemies." Draco burst into laughter, genuine, ringing laughter. "What an imagination you have. You and I enemies? Harry, we've been friends since first year. You remember how we met in Diagon Alley, don't you? How you said I seemed like a pleasant fellow, and we went to buy robes together." Harry remembered that meeting entirely differently. He He remembered an arrogant boy who spoke disparagingly of muggles, who boasted of his parents' wealth. But here, in this world, something had gone differently. "What about Ron Weasley?" asked Harry. Draco's expression changed instantly. The warm smile vanished, replaced by something hard and cold. "Weasley?" He spat the surname as though it were a curse. "That red-haired coward? Harry, you know what I think of him and his mudblood girlfriend. They always look at you as though you're some kind of threat, especially after you became a prefect instead of that loser." The blood froze in Harry's veins. Hermione, a mudblood? Ron, a coward? And he himself, a Slytherin prefect? This wasn't simply another world. This was an inverted world, where everything he knew about himself proved false. I need to freshen up," he mumbled, rising from the bed. Of course, Draco also stood. "I'll wait for you in the common room. We have double potions with Snape today, and you know how he dislikes lateness, even from his favorite. Favorite? Harry felt the world sway around him. In his reality, Snape couldn't stand him, seeing in him a copy of the arrogant James Potter. But here, when Draco left, Harry slowly approached the mirror above the wash basin. The face looking back at him was his own. The same green eyes, the same lightning bolt scar, the same unruly black hair. But there was something different. Something in the expression, in the way his shoulders were held, in the smile that seemed to lie naturally upon his lips. This Harry looked more confident. This Harry had never lived under the stairs at Privet Drive, never felt unwanted and unloved. This Harry had known from childhood that he was special and feared no one. Harry touched the mirror with his fingertips, and the reflection responded in kind. Only then did he notice that on his little finger sat a silver ring bearing the Slytherin crest. A ring he had never worn, but which fit his finger as though it had always been there. The shower helped clear his thoughts somewhat, but did not diminish the confusion. As Harry dressed, his hands instinctively knew where things were kept, how to tie the Slytherin-colored tie, where his bag of books lay. The muscle memory of this body was undeniable. He truly lived here, truly was a Slytherin. In the common room, not only Draco awaited him, but also their company. Pansy Parkinson sat in an armchair by the fireplace, combing her long black hair. When she saw Harry, her face lit up with genuine joy. "Harry! Finally!" We were starting to worry. She leapt from her chair and, before Harry could react, embraced him. Not as she would embrace an enemy or acquaintance, but as close friends embrace. Her embrace smelled of lavender and something sweet, and Harry found himself relaxing involuntarily. "Good morning, Pansy." He heard his own voice say words he hadn't planned to speak. His body remembered this friendship, even if his mind denied it. "Blaise has already gone to breakfast," she said, stepping back. "Said he didn't want to be late for Transfiguration. You know how afraid he is of disappointing McGonagall." Blaise Zabini, afraid of disappointing McGonagall? Harry tried to imagine this, but the image wouldn't form. In his world, Blaise had been a quiet, arrogant boy who kept aloof from conflicts. "Where are Crabbe and Goyle?" he asked, looking around. "Probably already in the Great Hall," replied Draco, adjusting his robes. "You know how they love food more than anything else in the world." Some things, it seemed, didn't change even in alternative realities. As they made their way from the dungeons to the Great Hall, Harry tried to adjust to the feeling of the green tie around his neck, to the weight of the silver brooch on his robes. Other students greeted him with nods and smiles, some with respect, some with obvious admiration. He was popular, that much was clear. The boy who lived, who had chosen Slytherin. In the Great Hall at the Slytherin table, he was greeted as a hero returning home. Blaise indeed sat there with a pile of books, nervously flipping through pages of his Transfiguration textbook. Crabbe and Goyle waved to him, indicating an empty seat between them. But most shocking of all was the sight of the other house tables. At the Gryffindor table sat Ron Weasley, but not the Ron Harry knew. This Ron looked younger, less confident. His freckled face was sullen, and his blue eyes stared into his plate, avoiding meeting the gaze of anyone from the Slytherin table. Beside him sat Hermione, but she too was different. Her thick chestnut hair was pulled back in a tight bun, spectacles perched on the tip of her nose, and her expression was grim and closed. When her gaze accidentally met Harry's, he saw in it something that made his heart painfully clench, fear mixed with disappointment. "Don't pay them any mind," whispered Draco, noticing his gaze. "They always look at you as though you owe them something, especially that mudblood. Thinks she's cleverer than all of us put together." Harry clenched his fists under the table. In his world, Hermione truly was cleverer than most people he knew. And she was his best friend, someone he trusted implicitly. Why does she look at me like that? He asked quietly. Draco raised his eyebrows in surprise. Seriously? You've forgotten? Harry, you yourself told the whole school a year ago that you don't want to associate with people who don't understand the importance of magical heritage. That was after she publicly criticized you for supporting Professor Umbridge on the matter of discipline amongst students. The world swayed again. He had supported Umbridge? That cruel, sadistic woman who had tortured him with her own hand? Impossible. But his hands instinctively remembered the feeling of the quill that wrote in his own blood, remembered the pain of punishment. I have to go, Harry said abruptly, rising from his seat. Where? Lessons don't start for another 20 minutes. Draco caught his sleeve. I need air. He broke free from Draco's grasp and quickly walked towards the exit from the Great Hall. Behind him he could hear Pansy asking Draco what was wrong with him, and Draco replying something about strange moods and poor health. Harry stepped out into the castle courtyard, where the October air was cool and fresh. Autumn here was just as it was in his world: golden oak leaves, red velvet of maples, the smell of smoke from Hagrid's hut. But even this familiar beauty couldn't calm the storm in his head. He sat on a stone bench by the lake and tried to make sense of the memory fragments that had begun returning. Images mingled in a kaleidoscope: the sorting ceremony, where the hat unhesitatingly proclaimed Slytherin; the first potions lesson, where Snape smiled at him approvingly; conversations with Draco about the advantages of pure blood. No, he whispered. This isn't me. I would never. But the memories kept coming. How he had laughed at Draco's jokes about muggles. How he had nodded when Pansy spoke about the superiority of old pureblood families. How he had remained silent when older students humiliated muggle-born first years. And most painful of all, how he had looked through Ron and Hermione in the corridors as though they didn't exist. Harry? He turned and saw Professor Snape approaching. But this Snape too was different. His face bore not the usual contemptuous grimace. His eyes didn't burn with anger at the sight of Harry. Instead, they showed concern. Mr. Malfoy said you weren't feeling well. Snape's voice was soft, almost fatherly. Perhaps you should go to the hospital wing. Harry stared at him, feeling something warm spread through his chest. This man cared about him. Truly cared, not pretending, not playing a role. In his eyes, Harry saw an echo of the same gaze with which Snape had looked upon Lily in his memories. Professor, he began slowly, what if I were different? What if I had made different choices? Snape sat beside him on the bench, which was so incredible that Harry nearly fell off. A philosophical question for such an early morning, responded the professor with a slight smile. But in all seriousness, we are all the result of our choices, Harry. Every decision shapes us, makes us who we are. Why do you ask? What if in another life I would have done everything differently? Chosen different friends, different values? Snape was quiet for a long time, gazing at the calm waters of the lake. Then you would be a different person, he finally said. Perhaps better, perhaps worse. Who can say? But here's what I know for certain. You, sitting beside me now, have grown into a good, intelligent person. A person of whom I am proud. Proud. Snape was proud of him. Harry felt his eyes fill with tears and quickly turned away. You have always been like a son to me, continued Snape quietly. The son I never had. Perhaps it's because of your eyes. They remind me of someone very dear. Lily. He was speaking of Lily. Harry bit his lip, trying not to cry. In his reality, Snape had also loved his mother, but that love had been poisoned by hatred for James, bitterness, and disappointment. But here, I know, he whispered. Snape looked at him in surprise. What do you know? About Mum. About the fact that she was dear to you. A long pause. Snape studied him intently, as though trying to read something in his face. How do you know this? He asked finally. Harry took a deep breath. He had to take a risk. If anyone could understand what was happening to him, it was Snape, the person who knew the secrets of magic more deeply than anyone. What if I told you that I'm not the Harry you know? That I've come from another world, where everything was different? Snape froze. His black eyes narrowed, studying Harry with the intensity Harry remembered from occlumency lessons. Continue, he said quietly. In my world, I was a Gryffindor. You hated me because you saw a copy of my father in me. Ron and Hermione were my best friends. And Draco. Harry paused. Draco was my enemy. Interesting, murmured Snape. And what happened to this other world? Voldemort returned. There was a war. Many people died. You too, you died protecting me. Snape shuddered at the mention of Voldemort. And how did you come to be here? A dark artifact. A silver serpent biting its own tail. My partner, and I found it during a raid. Ouroboros, whispered Snape. An ancient symbol of infinity and rebirth. An extremely powerful artifact, capable of moving consciousness between different realities. He turned to Harry. If this is true, then you are in serious danger. Why? Because each day spent in this reality makes you more like the local Harry. Eventually you might completely merge with this personality and forget who you truly were. Horror rolled through Harry's body in waves. He could already feel it. How his body knew things he didn't remember. How he instinctively reacted to situations as the local Harry would. How can I return? Snape was quiet for a long time. Ouroboros demands a sacrifice, he finally said. Not physical, but emotional. Something that will cause you such pain that it can tear the connection between realities. What exactly? The greatest betrayal. The cruelest act of which you are capable. Something that will destroy what is most precious to you in this world. Harry thought about Draco, who laughed at his jokes, about Pansy, who worried about his health, about Snape himself, who said he was proud of him. What if I don't want to return? He asked quietly. Then you will condemn the real Harry of this reality to oblivion. His soul will disappear forever, absorbed by yours. It was like a blow to the stomach. Somewhere there, in the depths of his consciousness, was another personality, a boy who had grown up in Slytherin, who was friends with Draco, whom Snape loved. And Harry was stealing his life with every passing moment. How much time do I have? Hard to say. Perhaps several weeks. Perhaps several months. But the longer you wait, the harder it will be. The bell announced the beginning of the first lesson. Snape rose from the bench and placed a hand on Harry's shoulder, a touch that was incredibly comforting. Think about what I've said, he said. And in the meantime, try to behave naturally. Don't arouse suspicion. When Snape left, Harry remained sitting by the lake, staring at his reflection in the dark water. The face looking back at him was his own, but now he knew it was only an illusion. Beneath the surface hid another person, whose life he was gradually destroying with his presence. He had to act, but first he needed to understand this world better, find a way to return what belonged to the real Harry Potter of this reality, even if it meant doing something terrible. When he finally went to his lesson, he didn't notice how his reflection in the lake lingered a moment longer, looking after him with an expression that was both familiar and utterly alien. The potion's lesson passed in a fog. Harry sat beside Draco, automatically following instructions that his body remembered better than his mind. His hands instinctively chopped mandrake roots into even slices, added ingredients in the correct sequence, stirred the potion clockwise 7 times, then anti-clockwise 3. Snape walked between the desks, checking students' work. When he stopped beside Harry, he placed a hand on his shoulder, a touch that was both support and a reminder of their morning conversation. Excellent work, as always, he said quietly, so that others wouldn't hear. The potion has the perfect golden color. Harry looked into the cauldron and indeed saw a potion that shimmered with gold, like liquid sunlight. In his world, he had never been particularly talented at potions, but here his hands knew every movement, every proportion. Thank you, Professor, he heard his own voice. At the neighboring desk, Neville Longbottom struggled with a potion that had turned an unpleasant brown color and was emitting thick smoke. In Harry's world, Neville had eventually become a talented wizard, a war hero. But here he remained the clumsy, frightened boy who trembled under Snape's gaze. Longbottom, Snape said sharply, moving away from Harry. What is this abomination you've created? How many times have I told you? Mandrake must be cut into even pieces. Neville cowered, as though expecting a physical blow. His hands shook as he tried to correct his mistake, but nerves only made the situation worse. In his own world, Harry had always defended Neville from Snape's bullying. But here, in the body of Slytherin Harry, he sat silently, watching the humiliation of his former friend. Worse still, part of him, the part that belonged to this reality, felt satisfaction at his superiority over the weaker student. After the lesson, Draco waited for Harry at the exit from the dungeons. You're strange today, he said as they walked the corridors to the next class. As if you're not yourself. Just thinking about something, replied Harry, trying to sound natural. About what? Perhaps I can help. Harry stopped in the middle of the corridor, suddenly realizing the full absurdity of the situation. Draco Malfoy, his most bitter enemy in the real world, was offering him help with genuine concern in his voice. Draco, he began carefully, have you never thought that there might be other ways things could have developed? That we might not be friends? Draco laughed. Of course I've thought about it, But it's impossible. You and I are too similar, both from old pureblood families, both understanding the importance of tradition and order. Besides, he grew more serious, you're the only one who never used our friendship. Others always wanted to get something from being friends with Lucius Malfoy's son. But you were friends with me just because. This was like a blow. In his own world, Harry had rejected Draco's friendship precisely because he boasted of his father's wealth and connections. But here everything was reversed. Here Draco valued him precisely because Harry hadn't used their friendship for selfish motives. They reached the Transfiguration classroom, where Professor McGonagall was already waiting for the students. Her gaze, when it settled on Harry, was cool but not hostile. Simply professional, without the maternal warmth he remembered from his world. Today we shall be transfiguring inanimate objects into living creatures, she announced. We will transform stone into mice. This is exceptionally complex magic, requiring not only technical mastery, but also deep understanding of life force. Many adult wizards cannot perform such transfiguration. Harry drew his wand, feeling its familiar weight. The spell flowed from his lips naturally. His movements were confident and precise. The piece of granite on his desk began to soften, change shape, and then suddenly transformed into a small gray mouse that squeaked and began sniffing around the desk. "Impressive, Mr. Potter," said McGonagall with professional approval. "Creating a living creature from lifeless stone is magic at NEWT level. 5 points to Slytherin. 5 points to Slytherin." In his world, he had earned points for Gryffindor, and McGonagall had always been particularly generous with praise for him. But here her tone was restrained, polite, but without particular warmth. Beside him, Draco had also successfully completed the transfiguration. His mouse was white with silver stripes, like a miniature copy of his hair. But on Ron Weasley's desk there still lay a stone that had only slightly changed shape, taking on the outline of a mouse's body, but without life. Hermione, as always, had mastered the task among the first. Her mouse was perfect, a fluffy brown creature with bright black eyes that actively explored its new world. But when McGonagall praised her work, Harry noticed how Hermione cast a quick glance at him, sad, almost plaintive. After the lesson, when the students were packing their things, Hermione approached Harry's desk. Draco immediately tensed, placing his hand on his wand. "What do you want, Granger?" he asked sharply. I wanted to speak with Harry," she said quietly, not looking Draco in the eye. "We have nothing to talk about," replied the voice that seemed to belong to Harry, but he didn't remember deciding to say anything. Hermione winced as though from physical pain. "Harry, please. I know things are difficult between us, but you used to be different. Do you remember how we prepared for OWLS together in 3rd year? How you helped me with my essay on Grindylows?" A memory struck Harry like lightning. He had indeed helped Hermione with an essay on Grindylows, but not in 3rd year, in 4th, and not here, but in his world. But here, that was long ago. He heard his own voice, cold and aloof. "People change, Granger. They grow up." Tears glistened in Hermione's eyes. She nodded, biting her lip, and quickly walked away. By the door Ron was waiting for her, his face red with anger and helplessness. "Satisfied?" he threw at Harry. "Satisfied that you made the best person in this school cry." "Weasley," interjected Draco, taking a step forward, "you'd better watch your tongue." "Or what? You'll tell Daddy?" Ron turned to Harry. "And you? I remember you being different, Harry. You used to be a good person. What happened to you?" Harry wanted to answer, wanted to explain that he truly was different, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But words stuck in his throat, and his body acted on its own again. "I simply stopped being naive," he said in a voice that sounded like glass. "Stop believing in childish fairy tales about equality and friendship between different types of people." Ron paled. Even Draco looked at Harry with surprise. Evidently, even by Slytherin standards, this was too harsh. "Harry," began Draco. "Let's go," Harry interrupted. "We have the next lesson." When they left the classroom, Harry felt McGonagall's gaze upon him. In her eyes he read disappointment and something resembling pity. In his world she had always supported him, even when he made mistakes. But here, the lunch break brought new discoveries. In the great hall Harry sat at the Slytherin table, surrounded by friends who considered him their leader. Conversations flowed naturally, about Quidditch, about upcoming OWLS, about politics in the wizarding world. "My father says they're finally starting to understand the importance of traditional values in the ministry," said Draco, cutting his meat. "Especially after Professor Umbridge became senior undersecretary." "Umbridge," At this name, Harry instinctively touched the back of his hand, where in his world were scars from her punishment quill. But here, she's a wonderful woman, he heard his own voice. Understands the importance of order and discipline in education. The words flowed on their own, without his participation. The part of his consciousness that belonged to this reality truly considered Umbridge a positive figure. It made him feel sick. By the way, Pansy leaned closer. She asked you to come see her after lunch. Something about a new initiative for prefects. Prefect? He was a Slytherin prefect. In his world, this honor had gone to Ron, and Harry remembered how he had envied him then. But here, after lunch, he indeed went to Umbridge's office. The office hadn't changed, the same pink plates with kittens on the walls, the same lace doilies, the same sickeningly sweet smell. Ah, Harry, dear boy. Umbridge smiled at him with that predatory smile he remembered. Come in, sit down. Tea. Thank you, Professor, he replied, settling into the pink armchair. I wanted to speak with you about our new educational initiative, she began, pouring tea into china cups. As you know, there are elements in the school who spread dangerous ideas about equality between wizards of different origins. Harry nodded, though inside everything boiled with indignation. I need your help in identifying these elements. You're popular among the students, they listen to you. Who better than you knows which students require correction of their views? She handed him a slip of paper with names. Harry glanced at the list and felt his blood freeze. There were the names of Hermione, Ron, Neville, Luna Lovegood, Dean Thomas, and other students who in his world had been members of the DA. What exactly is expected of me? He asked quietly. Simply observe. Listen. Report to me any suspicious conversations or gatherings. You understand how important it is to maintain discipline and proper values in the school. Harry stared at the list, feeling something heavy settle in his stomach. Umbridge wanted him to become an informant, to betray his former friends. Of course, Professor, he heard his own voice. I'll do everything necessary. When he left the office, he felt as though he had betrayed everything he had ever believed in. But worst of all was that part of him, the part that belonged to this reality, truly wanted to help Umbridge. Wanted to punish Hermione for her arrogance, Ron for his disrespect, Neville for his weakness. He walked the corridors, clutching the slip of paper in his fist, and thought about Snape's words. Each day made him more like the local Harry. How much longer could he resist before finally merging with this personality? That evening, as he sat in the Slytherin common room, trying to concentrate on his Transfiguration homework, Blaise approached him. Harry, can we talk? He asked quietly. They moved to a corner, away from the other students. What happened today in Transfiguration class? Asked Blaise. What you said to Granger, it was too much even for you. What do you mean? You know what? Harry, I understand you have complicated relations with her, but what you said about different types of people, it sounded like something my father would say. And you've never been like that. Blaise looked at him with concern. Even here, in this twisted reality, someone noticed the changes in his behavior. People change, repeated Harry the words he had said earlier. Not so drastically. Harry, what's happening to you? You can trust me. For a moment Harry was tempted to tell Blaise the truth. But then he remembered Snape's words about the need not to arouse suspicion. Everything's fine, he said. I'm just tired. Blaise didn't look convinced, but nodded. All right, but if you need to talk, I'm always here. That night Harry couldn't sleep for a long time. He lay in his bed under the green coverlets, listening to the steady breathing of the other Slytherins, and thought about the day that had passed. Each hour in this reality made him more similar to the Harry who belonged here. Each word, each action strengthened the bond between his consciousness and this alien life. He touched the scar on his forehead. Even here it remained, reminding him that some things stayed unchanged in any reality. Voldemort still wanted his death. The prophecy still hung over him like the sword of Damocles. But most frightening was that he was beginning to understand the choices of this world, beginning to see the logic in friendship with Draco, the advantages of supporting Umbridge, the rationality of separating from the wrong people. It was like slow poison that seeped into his thoughts, making him doubt the values he had considered unquestionable. Somewhere in the darkness of the dormitory, someone turned over in bed, mumbling something in their sleep. Harry closed his eyes and tried to recall the face of Hermione from his world. Her sincere smile, intelligent eyes, boundless devotion to friendship. But the image blurred, mixing with memories of today, when he had made her cry with his cruel words. He had to find a way to return home. But to do so, he would have to become the monster he never wanted to be. and time was inexorably passing, making this choice more difficult with each moment. Outside the window, the October wind howled, as though mourning the fates that could have been, but were destined to remain only shadows in the mirror of alternative realities. A week in this reality passed like a feverish dream. Harry woke each morning hoping that everything would prove to be a nightmare, but the green Slytherin coverlets and Draco's laughter at breakfast reminded him of the terrible reality of his situation. With each day, he felt the boundaries between the two personalities becoming increasingly blurred. Worst of all was how naturally he had begun to behave. His body knew every gesture, every intonation, every reaction that those around him expected from him. When Crabbe told another stupid story, Harry automatically laughed in the right places. When Pansy complained about the arrogance of Muggleborns, he nodded with understanding. When Draco criticized the Weasleys' policies in the Ministry, Harry agreed, feeling something cold and disgusting growing in his soul. On Saturday morning, he sat in the Great Hall at breakfast, trying to concentrate on his essay on the Goblin Rebellions for History of Magic, spread out beside his plate. Around him at the Slytherin table, his housemates were talking, their voices merging into the familiar hum about Quidditch, homework, and gossip about other students. Harry, Draco sat down beside him, holding a copy of the Daily Prophet. Interesting what your esteemed Professor Umbridge has written. He unfolded the newspaper, showing an article with a large headline, Educational Reform, New Standards of Discipline in Magical Schools. Harry skimmed the text, feeling nausea rise to his throat. The article described new safety measures at Hogwarts, enhanced punishments for students who spread dangerous ideas, creation of an informant network among prefects, stricter control over lesson content. Sensible woman, said Blaise, peering over Draco's shoulder. Finally, someone's bringing order to this school. Yes, Harry heard his own voice, though inside everything screamed in protest. It was high time something was done about the chaos. Pansy smiled at him approvingly. Especially with those Gryffindors. They think they can do whatever they like just because they were once popular. She cast a contemptuous glance across the hall at the red and gold table, where Ron and Hermione sat with grim faces, whispering about something with Neville and Luna Lovegood. Harry could see how Hermione occasionally looked around, as though seeking an escape from an unpleasant situation. Don't pay them any mind, whispered Draco, noticing his gaze. They always look at you as though you owe them something, especially that mudblood. Thinks she's cleverer than all of us put together. Harry clenched his fists under the table. In his world, Hermione truly was cleverer than most people he knew. And she was his best friend, someone he trusted implicitly. Why does she look at me like that? He asked quietly. Draco raised his eyebrows in surprise. Seriously? You've forgotten? Harry, you yourself told the whole school a year ago that you don't want to associate with people who don't understand the importance of magical heritage. That was after she publicly criticized you for supporting Professor Umbridge on the matter of discipline amongst students. The world swayed again. He had supported Umbridge? That cruel, sadistic woman who had tortured him with her own hand? Impossible. But his hands instinctively remembered the feeling of the quill that wrote in his own blood, remembered the pain of punishment. I have to go, Harry said abruptly, rising from his seat. Where? Lessons don't start for another 20 minutes. Draco caught his sleeve. I need air. He broke free from Draco's grasp and quickly walked towards the exit from the Great Hall. Behind him, he could hear Pansy asking Draco what was wrong with him, and Draco replying something about strange moods and poor health. Harry stepped out into the castle courtyard, where the October air was cool and fresh. Autumn here was just as it was in his world, golden oak leaves, red velvet of maples, the smell of smoke from Hagrid's hut. But even this familiar beauty couldn't calm the storm in his head. He sat on a stone bench by the lake and tried to make sense of the memory fragments that had begun returning. Images mingled in a kaleidoscope, the sorting ceremony, where the hat unhesitatingly proclaimed Slytherin, the first potions lesson, where Snape smiled at him approvingly, conversations with Draco about the proper values of the wizarding world. He saw how at 11 years old he had met Draco in Diagon Alley and immediately felt drawn to him. How he had enthusiastically talked about the magical world, while Draco wisely nodded, explaining the correct values of wizarding society. He saw how on the train to Hogwarts he had sat with Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle, talking about Quidditch and magical schools. How he had disliked Ron at first sight. His worn clothes, clumsiness, and simplicity had seemed unacceptable to him. He saw the sorting ceremony, where the hat had unhesitatingly proclaimed Slytherin, and how he had felt pride and satisfaction sitting beside Draco at the green table. And then, the gradual distancing from the Gryffindors. How he had begun to look down on them. How he had absorbed ideas about pure-blood superiority. How he had learned to hide compassion and show strength. "Yes," whispered Harry, looking at Hermione. "We truly were never friends." The words caused him physical pain, but he couldn't stop them. The part of his personality that belonged to this world was taking over. Hermione stepped back, as though he had struck her. "I understand," she said quietly. "Then we truly have nothing to discuss." She turned and walked away without looking back. Neville and Luna hurried after her, casting reproachful glances at Harry. Ron lingered a moment longer. "You know what, Potter?" he said quietly, so that only Harry could hear. "Perhaps the hat didn't make a mistake when it sent you to Slytherin. Perhaps it saw something that we didn't want to see." With these words he too left, leaving Harry standing amidst the dispersed crowd of students. Some Slytherins approached him with congratulations, patting him on the back, praising him for his proper behavior. But their voices sounded as though through water. "Excellently conducted operation," said Draco, folding the paper and putting it in his pocket. "Now Professor Umbridge will know whom she's dealing with." "Yes," Harry responded automatically. "She'll be pleased." But inside him something screamed with horror and self-disgust. That evening he sat in Umbridge's office, watching her read the paper with the meeting plan. Her pink face glowed with satisfaction. "Excellent, dear Harry," she croaked. "Simply excellent. This is what true cooperation in the name of order means." She rose from her chair and went to a cabinet, from which she took a small silver box. "For such excellent work you deserve a reward." She opened the box, showing an elegant silver brooch with the Ministry of Magic emblem. "A special decoration for students who demonstrate exceptional devotion to proper values." Harry took the brooch with trembling fingers. The metal was cold and heavy, like a clod of guilt and betrayal. "Thank you, Professor," he heard his own voice. "But this is only the beginning," continued Umbridge, sitting at her desk and taking up her quill. "I need you to continue observing. These students will undoubtedly try to organize something else. And when they do—" She didn't finish, but smiled meaningfully. When Harry returned to the Slytherin common room, he felt as though a tremendous weight lay on his shoulders. The brooch in his robe pocket burned like a red-hot coal, reminding him of what he had just done. In the common room his friends waited with congratulations and approval. Draco was telling other Slytherins about the scene by the stairs, embellishing the details slightly. Pansy listened with delight, occasionally exclaiming things like, "How amusing," or "They deserved it." "Harry showed them their place," said Draco. "Finally someone put those arrogant Gryffindors in their place." "Especially that mudblood Granger," added Pansy. "She thought she could boss everyone about just because she reads a lot of books." Harry sat in an armchair by the fire, listening to these conversations, and felt something cold and sticky growing in his soul. Part of him, the part that belonged to this reality, felt satisfaction from the praise. But another part, the real Harry Potter from another reality, screamed with horror. "I'm going to bed," he said, rising from his chair. "So early?" Blaise was surprised. "It's only 9 o'clock." "I'm tired," replied Harry, not looking anyone in the eye. In the dormitory, he lay on his bed without undressing and stared at the ceiling. Outside the window, October rain drummed against the glass, creating a melancholy melody. In the darkness of the dormitory could be heard the quiet whisper of other fifth years preparing for sleep. Harry touched the scar on his forehead. Even here, in this twisted reality, it remained a reminder of who he truly was. The boy who had survived the killing curse, who had been chosen by fate to fight the dark forces. But now he himself was becoming a dark force. With each day, with each action, he was increasingly transforming into that which he had once fought against. "What's happening to me?" he whispered into the darkness. There was no answer, only the rain outside the window and his own thoughts, spinning in a vicious circle of guilt and despair. The next morning the news of Hermione's arrest spread through the school with the speed of wildfire. Umbridge had called her to her office immediately after the first lesson, and since then no one had seen Hermione. "They say she's been sent home," whispered one of the fourth-year Ravenclaws at the neighboring table, "for organizing illegal gatherings. Or maybe to Azkaban," someone else added. "My older brother says the ministry is now very harsh in punishing disobedience." Harry tried to eat, but the food wouldn't go down his throat. Each piece of toast seemed like cardboard, each sip of juice like poison. Around him the Slytherins discussed the news with satisfaction. "Finally," said Draco, buttering his bread. One less arrogant troublemaker. Troublemaker? Blaise was surprised. Draco, she's Muggle-born. Voldemort kills them. He doesn't recruit them. Who said she was working for Voldemort? Draco smiled slyly. There are other ways to undermine order in the wizarding world. Democracy, equality, all those Muggle ideas. That's also a kind of terrorism. Harry gripped his goblet, so hard his knuckles went white. In his world, Hermione had been one of the most devoted fighters against real terrorism. She had risked her life to save the wizarding world from Voldemort. Where is she now? He asked quietly. Who knows? Draco shrugged. Perhaps Umbridge sent her to her parents, or to the Ministry for additional questioning. Not our concern. Not our concern. Harry looked at the red and gold table, where Ron sat alone, barely touching his food. His face was gray with grief and helplessness. Beside him sat Neville and several other Gryffindors, but they were silent, afraid of drawing attention. I have to go, said Harry, rising from the table. Where? Lessons don't start for half an hour, Draco was surprised. To the library. I have to finish my history of magic essay. This was a lie. Actually, he was going to Snape's office, the only person in this school whom he could trust. Snape's office was just as gloomy and cold as in his world. Tall cabinets with jars filled with strange ingredients, the flicker of candles casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. But when Snape raised his head from the papers he was marking, his gaze was warm, almost fatherly. Harry, what's happened? Professor, Harry sat in the chair opposite the desk, feeling his hands tremble. Hermione Granger has been arrested. I know, Snape nodded. Professor Umbridge informed the staff. Because of me, whispered Harry. It happened because of me. I gave her that paper, Harry. Snape rose from his chair and approached him. You did what you thought was right. You couldn't have known. Couldn't have known what? Harry raised his head, looking into Snape's black eyes. That Umbridge is a monster? That she's destroying everything good in this school? I knew that. Part of me knew, but I still. He fell silent, unable to continue. Snape was quiet for a long time, studying his face. Harry, he finally said quietly, there are things I cannot tell you. There are truths that might cause pain. But I want you to know, you are a good person. Deep in your soul, despite everything, you remain a good person. How can you say that after what I've done? Because I see the pain in your eyes. True monsters don't suffer from their actions. Snape sat on the edge of his desk, looking at Harry with concern. Tell me, what do you feel when you do what others expect of you? Disgust, Harry answered without hesitation. Self-hatred, the feeling that I'm betraying everything I believe in. And what do you feel when you resist those expectations? Harry thought about it. Fear. Fear of losing everything I have in this world. Friends, respect, my place in society. And what's more important, external approval or inner peace? The question hung in the air. Harry knew the right answer, but it was frightening to say it. Inner peace, he finally whispered. Then you know what to do. Snape stood and went to one of the cabinets. He took out a small bottle with transparent liquid. What is it? Asked Harry. A clarity draft, replied Snape, handing him the bottle. It will help you see things as they truly are, not as your mind wants to see them. Harry took the bottle. The liquid inside shimmered like liquid silver. Is it safe? Absolutely, but it may show you things you don't want to see. Harry uncorked the bottle and drank the contents in one gulp. The taste was strange, both bitter and sweet, with a hint of mint and something else he couldn't identify. At first nothing happened. Then the world around him began to change. Colors became brighter, outlines clearer, and he began to see. He saw himself in the mirror behind Snape, but not one, but two. One Harry was as he remembered himself, the boy from Privet Drive, who was friends with Ron and Hermione, who fought injustice. The second Harry was an arrogant Slytherin with cold eyes, who looked down on others. And he saw how these two images were gradually merging together. Professor, he whispered, what's happening to me? You're fighting for your soul, Snape replied quietly. And so far you're losing. The potion continued to work. Harry saw threads stretching from his heart to the hearts of other people. Most of the threads were dark, connections based on fear, benefit, conformity. But some remained bright, a thin golden thread stretching to Snape, a silver one to Draco, though it was darkening each day, and a very thin, barely visible one to Hermione. You can still change the ending of this story, said Snape, as though reading his thoughts. How? I can't bring Hermione back. Can't change what I've already done. You can stop doing it in future. The potion's effect gradually weakened. but the clarity it had brought remained. Harry saw the situation as it was. He had found himself in a world where everything was reversed, and was gradually transforming into a person he had always despised. "Professor, what if I told you I know a way to change all this? To restore justice, save those who are suffering?" Snape looked at him intently. "Continue. What if this way required me to do something terrible? Something that would cause unbearable pain to people who are dear to me in this world?" A long pause. Snape sat in his chair, crossing his arms on his chest. "Harry, there are things worse than death. There are things worse than physical pain. Living a lie, betraying one's own principles, gradually transforming into a monster. This can be worse than any temporary suffering, even if that suffering affects innocent people. Especially if the alternative is the destruction of many souls." Harry nodded, feeling a decision ripening in his chest. He knew what had to be done. All that remained was to find the courage to do it. "Thank you, Professor," he said, rising from his chair. "Harry," Snape stopped him. "Whatever you decide to do, remember that true courage lies not in being unafraid, but in doing the right thing despite fear." Harry nodded and left the office. In the corridor, Draco was waiting for him, leaning against the wall with a concerned expression. "Finally, I've been looking for you everywhere. Where were you?" "Talking to Snape," replied Harry, trying to sound natural. "About what?" "You look different." Draco was right. The clarity draft had left its mark. Harry saw the world more sharply, more clearly. And he saw Draco not as a friend, but as a person who was drawing him into a swamp of compromises and moral concessions. "Just discussing homework," he lied. They walked the corridors to the next lesson, Defense Against the Dark Arts, now taught by Umbridge. On the way they met a group of first-year Slytherins who were excitedly examining some magazine. "What have you got there?" asked Draco, approaching closer. "The new issue of Witch Weekly," replied one of the boys. "There's an article about new laws regarding Muggle-born wizards." Draco snatched the magazine from his hands and began reading. A satisfied smile appeared on his face. "Listen to this, Harry," he said. "The Ministry of Magic is considering introducing mandatory registration for all wizards of Muggle origin. This will help control their education and integration into magical society, ensuring adherence to traditional values." The first years nodded enthusiastically. In their eyes, Harry saw the same blind admiration for proper ideas that he himself had once felt in this world. "Excellent," he said, trying to maintain an indifferent tone. It was high time order was brought, but inside him everything boiled with indignation. Registration of Muggleborns. This was like the first step towards what Death Eaters had done in his world. In defense class, Umbridge lectured about proper methods of magical defense. Her squeaky voice told them how important it was to trust official sources of information and not believe panic rumors about the return of he who must not be named. "As you all know," she said, pacing between the desks, "certain unstable elements in our society spread dangerous myths about threats from long-defeated dark forces. This is not only senseless but harmful to our society's morale." Harry gritted his teeth. In his own world, he had known that Voldemort had returned in fourth year, had seen with his own eyes how he had killed Cedric Diggory. But here, "Mr. Potter," Umbridge suddenly addressed him, "as someone who has special authority among students, what do you think about these foolish rumors?" All eyes in the class turned to Harry. He felt Draco tense beside him in anticipation of the correct answer. Other Slytherins looked at him hopefully, expecting him to say something sensible and politically correct. "I think," Harry began slowly, "that truth is always more important than comfort." Umbridge tensed. "What exactly do you mean?" "I mean that hiding facts never makes a situation better. If there's a threat, people have the right to know about it." The class froze. Draco stared at his best friend in horror. Umbridge grew pale, then red with anger. "Mr. Potter, I hope you're not going to join the panic-mongering of certain unstable elements of our society." Harry looked directly into her eyes. "I'm going to join the truth, Professor. And the truth is that Voldemort has returned." Cries of horror and surprise echoed through the classroom. Several girls screamed and grabbed their desks. Even some Slytherins, who usually supported Harry, shrank away from him as though he had become a carrier of some contagious disease. "Enough!" screamed Umbridge. "Mr. Potter, you have crossed all bounds. Detention for an entire week, and minus 50 points from Slytherin. Minus 50 points from Slytherin." Harry almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. In his world, he had lost points from Gryffindor for much lesser offenses. "Professor," he said calmly, You can punish me for speaking the truth, but that won't make the truth any less true. Get out of my classroom, shrieked Umbridge, her pink face turning purple with rage. Right now. Harry slowly gathered his books and walked to the exit. As he passed Draco's desk, Draco grabbed his sleeve. Harry, what's happened to you? He whispered. This is suicide. Perhaps. But at least honest suicide. He pulled his arm away. Maybe. But at least it's honest suicide. He left the classroom under the stunned gazes of his classmates. The corridor was quiet and empty. Harry leaned against the wall and felt something release in his chest. For the first time since arriving in this reality, he had said what he truly thought. It was frightening. It meant the end of his status in Slytherin, the end of his friendship with Draco, the end of comfortable life in this inverted world. But it also meant the beginning of a return to himself. Behind the classroom door, he could hear Umbridge's muffled ranting as she tried to calm the class after his outburst. It didn't take much imagination to picture what would come next. Letters to parents, meetings with heads of houses, possibly even expulsion. But worst of all lay ahead. He had to return to the Slytherin common room and face the gazes of people who yesterday had considered him their leader and hero. He had to explain to Draco why he had betrayed everything the boy believed in. Harry straightened and walked the castle corridors. His heart was heavy, but also light at the same time. He had taken the first step back to himself. Now he had to take the rest, even if they would be the most painful steps of his life. Outside the windows, the October sun broke through the clouds, casting bright patches on the stone walls of Hogwarts. And for the first time in many days, this world seemed to Harry a little less alien and hostile. Perhaps because he had finally begun to fight to remain himself. The news of Harry Potter's outburst in defense against the dark arts spread through Hogwarts like wildfire. By evening, there wasn't a single person in the castle who hadn't heard how Slytherin's favorite son had publicly declared Voldemort's return and confronted Professor Umbridge. When Harry returned to the common room after serving his first detention with Umbridge, 3 hours of writing lines, "I will not spread panic-mongering rumors," in his own blood, he was met with absolute silence. Conversations ceased when he crossed the threshold. Dozens of pairs of eyes stared at him with a mixture of shock, disappointment, and indignation. In the corner by the fireplace sat his former friends. Draco stood with his back to the entrance, staring into the flames with a tense expression. Pansy sat in an armchair, nervously twisting a handkerchief in her hands. Blaise was turning pages of a book, but his eyes weren't moving. He clearly wasn't reading. "Hello," said Harry quietly. Draco slowly turned around. His gray face was cold as ice. "Hello, Potter," his voice sounded formal, distant. For the first time in all their years of friendship, he had called Harry by his surname instead of his first name. Pansy raised her head, and Harry saw something in her eyes he had never seen there before when she looked at him: fear. "Harry," she began uncertainly. What happened to you? This isn't you. The real you would never have." "Never have what?" asked Harry, settling into one of the empty armchairs. "Never have told the truth." "The truth?" Draco spun around sharply to face him. "What truth?" "You're repeating the same mad fantasies as that barmy old Dumbledore." Around them, other Slytherins listened tensely. Some of the younger students looked at Harry with apprehension, as though he might explode with something even more shocking at any moment. "Draco," Harry leaned forward, looking into his friend's eyes. "Do you remember 4th year? The Triwizard Tournament? Cedric Diggory's death?" "Of course I remember. A tragic accident during the final task." "Not an accident. Cedric was murdered in the graveyard at Little Hangleton. Before my very eyes. Killed by Peter Pettigrew on Voldemort's orders, who that night regained his body." Draco stepped back as though Harry had struck him. "You're mad," he whispered. That's impossible." "It's possible. And you know it, Draco. Deep down you've always known it. Your father doesn't wear long sleeves even in summer for no reason, does he?" At the mention of Lucius Malfoy, Draco's face grew even paler. "Don't you dare mention my father. Your father is a Death Eater, Draco. He bears the dark mark on his left arm. And when Voldemort returned, that mark began to burn again." The silence in the common room became oppressive. Even the first years, who usually didn't understand serious conversations by older students, felt the tension in the air. Blaise finally raised his head from his book. "Harry," he said carefully, "suppose you're telling the truth. Why didn't you say anything before? Why now?" It was a good question. Harry couldn't explain that before he had been a different person, the local Harry, who had feared losing his place in the Slytherin hierarchy. Because I was afraid, he replied honestly. Afraid of losing friends, status, everything I had. But some things are more important than personal comfort. Pansy bit her lip. But what will our parents say? Harry, my father works at the ministry. If word gets out that I support this, I could be expelled from school. I'm not asking you to support me, said Harry quietly. I simply can't lie anymore. Draco slammed his butterbeer goblet down on the table with a bang. You know what, Potter? Perhaps the hat made a mistake when it sent you to Slytherin. Perhaps you were always a Gryffindor at heart. The word sounded like a curse. In Slytherin there was no worse insult than being called a Gryffindor. Perhaps, Harry agreed calmly. This was the last straw. Draco grabbed his things and headed for the stairs leading to the dormitory. Draco, wait. Harry rose from his chair. Don't follow me, Potter. Draco threw over his shoulder. I don't know you. The person I considered my best friend would never have betrayed everything we believe in. He disappeared around the bend of the stairs. Crabbe, Goyle, and several other older students followed him. Pansy looked sadly at Harry and also left. Blaise remained last. Do you understand what just happened? He asked quietly. Yes. I lost my friends. Not just friends. You lost protection. In Slytherin there's a simple rule. Whoever isn't with us is against us. And now you're not with us. Harry nodded. He knew this. Blaise, do you believe me? Blaise was quiet for a long time. I don't know what to believe, he finally said. But I know that the person who stood up to Umbridge today is more like the real Harry Potter than whoever you've been these past months. With these words he too left, leaving Harry alone in the middle of the common room, which suddenly seemed alien and hostile. The following days became a real trial. Slytherins who had previously greeted him with respect now avoided meeting his eyes. At meals no one sat beside him, leaving him surrounded by empty places like a leper. Pansy stopped talking to him altogether. Draco behaved as though he didn't exist. Even Crabbe and Goyle, who had previously followed Harry like faithful dogs, now demonstratively turned away when he walked past. But worst of all were the stares. Everywhere he went, he was looked at with a mixture of fear, contempt, and curiosity. Whispers stopped when he appeared and resumed when he passed. Did you hear he's sleeping alone in the dormitory now? The other boys moved to the spare room. My older brother says parents have written to the headmaster, demanding his expulsion for spreading panic. What if he's really gone mad? What if he snaps and curses someone? Detention with Umbridge became a daily routine. Every evening he sat in her pink office, writing punishment lines in his own blood, while the words carved themselves into the back of his hand forever. I will not spread dangerous lies. I trust the Ministry of Magic. He who must not be named does not exist. Each line echoed with pain in his hand and soul. But Harry endured it because he knew this was the price of truth in a world where lies had become the norm. Umbridge savored every moment of his suffering. You know, Mr. Potter, she would say, watching him write with a trembling hand, you could stop this at any moment. Simply admit your mistake. Tell everyone you were lying, that you had mental health problems. No, Harry would reply, not raising his head. Even if it means losing all your friends? Even if your entire house turns against you? Even then? Interesting, she would lean closer, her breath smelling of overly sweet sweets. And what will Professor Snape say when he learns that his favorite student has become a rebel and a liar? At the mention of Snape, something painfully tightened in Harry's chest. Among all the losses, the most terrible was the possibility of losing the trust and affection of the man who had become a true father to him in this world. But the next day, when he came anxiously to Potions class, Snape greeted him with his usual nod and even helped him correct a mistake in his potion with a quiet spell, so others wouldn't notice. After the lesson, he kept Harry behind. Stay for a moment, Mr. Potter. When the last student had left, Snape went to the door and cast a silencing charm on it. How are you feeling? He asked without preamble. Like a pariah and a traitor, Harry replied honestly. But alive and with a clear conscience? Yes. Snape nodded with understanding. You know, Harry, there comes a moment in every person's life when they must choose between what is easy and what is right. Most people choose the easy path. And you? What did you choose? Snape was quiet for a long time, gazing out the window at the lake. First the easy path, he finally said, and regretted it for a long time. But then I realized it's never too late to change course. He turned to Harry. You know your path will only become more difficult? I know, and that you'll have to make even harder decisions? At these words something cold ran down Harry's spine. Snape knew about the artifact, knew about the price of return. And in his eyes Harry could read understanding that the worst was yet to come. "I know," Harry repeated more quietly. "Then remember, true strength lies not in avoiding difficult choices, but in making them consciously and bearing responsibility for the consequences." Harry nodded, feeling something warm spread through his chest. Even if the whole world had turned away from him, there remained one person who understood and supported him. "Professor, what if I had to do something terrible for the greater good?" Snape looked at him intently. Such as causing pain to innocent people in order to save others. "That's a philosophical question with no simple answer," Snape said slowly. "But I know one thing. If you're asking such questions, if it tortures you, then you haven't lost your soul yet. True monsters don't doubt." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Snape removed the silencing charm. "Come in." Blaise Zabini entered the office. Seeing Harry, he hesitated. "Professor, I can wait." "No, it's all right," Snape glanced at Harry. "We've finished. But remember what we talked about." As Harry was leaving the office, Blaise stopped him. "Harry, wait." They stopped in the corridor. Blaise looked around, making sure no one was nearby. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began quietly. "About Voldemort, about Death Eaters, about everything. And I can't stop thinking about certain things. About how my father's been acting strangely lately. About the letters he receives at night. About how he's afraid to leave the house after dark." Harry felt a flash of hope. Perhaps not everything was lost yet. "Do you believe me?" "I don't know, but I want to find out the truth." This was progress. At least one person in Slytherin was ready to put truth above comfort. "Blaise, this could be dangerous. Living in lies is dangerous too." That night Harry couldn't sleep. He lay in his dormitory, now truly alone, since the other fifth years had indeed moved to the spare room, and thought about Snape's words. True monsters don't doubt. But he doubted. Every moment, every second. The thought that he would have to cause pain to Ron and Hermione of this reality in order to return home was tearing him apart. But the alternative was staying here forever, absorbing the soul of the real Harry of this world, and becoming something he had always feared. A person without principles who lived at the expense of another's life. Outside the window, November was approaching its end. The first snow lay on the ground in a thin layer, like a shroud on the grave of his former life in this world. Each day made him stronger and lonelier at the same time. And somewhere in the depths of the castle, in the room of requirement or another secret place, perhaps those who still believed in truth were gathering. Ron, perhaps some other Gryffindors, Ravenclaws, Hufflepuffs. People who hadn't given up, who continued to fight. And he needed to find a way to reach them. Not for friendship, that ship had already sailed. But to understand whether a world that had turned away from truth was worth saving. So far there was no answer. But Harry knew the time of decision was approaching with each passing day. And when it came, he would have to choose between his own salvation and his conscience. His last thought before sleep was of Hermione from his own world. Would she forgive him for what he was about to do? Would she understand that sometimes even good people are forced to do terrible things? He fell asleep hoping that somewhere in a parallel reality his friends remembered him and didn't lose faith that he would return home. December came to Hogwarts with the fury of true winter. Snow blanketed the castle, transforming it into a fairy tale fortress of white marble. But beauty could not hide the tension that mounted with each passing day. Umbridge's new educational decrees appeared weekly, each more severe than the last. Harry read the latest decree, pinned to the notice board in the entrance hall, feeling his blood freeze. Educational Decree No. 27 All students are required to report suspicious conversations among their peers. Reward for useful information, 10 galleons. Punishment for concealing information, expulsion from school. A crowd of students had gathered around the board, their faces expressing a mixture of fear and outrage. Several younger Ravenclaws whispered amongst themselves, afraid even to look each other in the eye. A group of Hufflepuffs read the decree a second time, as though not believing what they had read. 10 galleons, muttered someone from 7th year. Quite a lot of money for a student. Hush, his girlfriend whispered. What if someone hears and reports it? Harry turned away from the board in disgust. Umbridge was methodically turning the school into a prison where everyone suspected everyone else. And worst of all, it was working. Students really were beginning to fear one another. Disgusting, isn't it? A quiet voice beside him made him turn around. Luna Lovegood stood nearby, looking at the decree with her large gray eyes. Her usual dreamy expression had changed to something more serious. Yes, Harry agreed cautiously. In recent weeks, he had learned not to trust anyone completely. You know, continued Luna in the same calm tone, my father says the best way to fight Nargles is not to fear them. They feed on fear. Nargles. In Luna's world, this could mean anything. But Harry understood the hint. And where do these Nargles usually hide? He asked just as calmly. In dark places, where people don't dare to look. For instance, in the Room of Requirement. 7th floor, opposite the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy teaching trolls to dance. Harry nodded, trying not to show his surprise. The Room of Requirement. Of course. The perfect place for secret meetings. And when are the Nargles most active? He continued the game. Usually in the evenings. Around 8 o'clock. Especially on Mondays. Monday. Today was Saturday. Thank you for the advice, said Harry. I'll have to check that. Luna smiled one of her enigmatic smiles and wandered away, leaving Harry standing by the notice board deep in thought. So resistance still existed. Somewhere in the castle people were gathering who hadn't given up, who continued to fight. And now he had a chance to join them. But did he want to? And did they want to see him among them? The answer came of its own accord when on Monday evening he stood before the wall opposite the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, trying to gather his thoughts. 3 times he walked past the wall, thinking, I need a place where those who oppose Umbridge gather. The wall parted, revealing a door to a spacious room with comfortable armchairs and a fireplace. Inside were about 20 students from different houses, and they all turned when he entered. The silence was deafening. Ron sat in an armchair by the fireplace, his face turning red with anger at the sight of Harry. Neville jumped up from his seat, instinctively reaching for his wand. Several other Gryffindors tensed, ready for conflict. What's he doing here? Ron snarled through gritted teeth. Maybe he's come to spy for his beloved Umbridge, someone added from behind. Calm down, Luna interjected in the same dreamy voice. He's here because I invited him. You invited him? Ron leapt from his chair. Luna, have you gone completely mad? He's the one who betrayed Hermione. At the mention of Hermione, something painfully tightened in Harry's chest. For 2 months he hadn't known where she was, what had happened to her. Officially she had simply been recalled by her parents. But everyone knew that was a lie. Where is she? Harry asked quietly. Where is Hermione? As if you don't care? Ron snapped. Or have you forgotten how you handed her over to Umbridge? I haven't forgotten, Harry took a step forward, ignoring the fact that several students had reached for their wands. And I regret it every single day. But I truly don't know what happened to her after that day. Ron looked at him for a long time, something heavy in his eyes. She was taken from school at the end of October, a week after her arrest, he finally said quietly. Officially, recalled by her parents. But her parents knew nothing until they received a letter from the ministry. And what was in the letter? That their daughter was detained on suspicion of subversive activities. That she was being held in ministry custody for clarification of circumstances. Ron's voice trembled with anger. That was over 2 months ago. No one has seen her since. She's alive? Harry's voice shook. We don't know, Ron replied honestly, and Harry saw tears glisten in his eyes. We hope so. The weight of guilt crushed Harry like a mountain. He had done this. His betrayal had led to Hermione disappearing, perhaps forever. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring her back, Neville said bitterly. You're right, Harry nodded. Absolutely right. I did a terrible thing. I became complicit in a system I despise. But now I'm here to try to make amends. Why should we believe you? Asked Cho Chang, who sat in a corner with several Ravenclaws. How do we know this isn't a trap? Harry looked at her, then at the others. In their eyes he saw mistrust, fear, anger. And he understood that words wouldn't help here. Actions were needed. You shouldn't, he said simply. You have no reason to trust me. But you have a reason to listen to me. He took a folded parchment from his pocket, a copy of one of the educational decrees that he had secretly taken from Umbridge's office during one of his detentions. Educational Decree number 31, he said, unfolding the paper. Not yet officially announced. Set to take effect next week. Luna took the parchment and read aloud. All students of non-magical origin are subject to mandatory additional testing for cultural suitability. Students who fail the testing will be transferred to special institutions for correctional education. Horror on the students' faces was more eloquent than any words. Dean Thomas went white as a sheet. Several other Muggle-born students grabbed their chairs. Correctional education, whispered one of the fourth-year Ravenclaws. What does that mean? Concentration camps, Harry said quietly. For Muggle-born wizards. Under the guise of re-education, they plan to isolate them from the rest of magical society. Ron slowly sat back in his chair, staring at Harry with wide eyes. Where did you get this document? I stole it from Umbridge's office. During detention. Why? Why did you do that? Harry was quiet for a long time, staring into the fireplace. Because I realized silence makes me complicit. And I can no longer be complicit. Neville coughed nervously. Suppose we believe you. What do you propose we do? Fight, Harry replied simply. Learn to defend ourselves. Prepare for what's coming. And what's coming? Asked Cho. Harry looked at her, then at the others. War, he said quietly. Voldemort has returned, and this is only the beginning. Umbridge and her decrees. This is preparation for something much worse. At the word Voldemort, several students flinched. But no one objected. Recent months had shown that the world truly was changing for the worse. And how exactly are we supposed to fight? Asked Ron, still looking at Harry with mistrust. We're just students. Students who know magic, Harry replied. Students who can learn to defend themselves and protect others. He looked around the room. I have a proposal. Let's create a defense study group. Real magic, not the nonsense Umbridge teaches. Practical spells, combat magic, tactics. And who would teach? One of the Hufflepuffs asked skeptically. Harry took a deep breath. I would. Silence again. Then Dean Thomas laughed humorlessly. You? The same you who's been sucking up to Umbridge for months. The same me who knows over 100 combat spells, Harry replied calmly. The same me who's been surviving encounters with dark wizards since childhood. This wasn't quite true for this world, but his body remembered everything the real Harry Potter had experienced. Every spell, every battle, every lesson learned from confronting Death Eaters. Prove it, Ron said suddenly, standing up from his chair. What? Prove you can teach us. Show us something we don't know. Harry nodded and drew his wand. The others instinctively stepped back. Expecto Patronum, the familiar Latin tore from his lips. Blinding silver light burst from his wand tip. A magnificent stag materialized in the center of the room, its antlers gleaming as though made of liquid light. The Patronus slowly circled the room, stopping before each student as though greeting them. Gasps of admiration echoed throughout the room. Most of the students had never seen a corporeal Patronus. Bloody hell, Neville whispered. That's adult-level magic. The Patronus is one of the most complex defensive spells, said Harry, allowing the stag to fade. It not only repels Dementors but can also carry messages, serve as protection against dark magic. He looked around at the enchanted faces. I can teach you this. I can teach you shield charms that will withstand unforgivable curses. I can show you how to fight dark creatures. And what do you want in return? Ron asked suspiciously. Harry felt something tighten in his throat. Time had come for the truth. At least part of the truth. Forgiveness, he said quietly. A chance to atone for what I've done. Ron looked at him for a long time, something heavy in his eyes. And Hermione? What about her? I want to help find her. Want to make sure what happened to her never happens to anyone else. Ron was quiet, continuing to study Harry's face. And how do we know you won't betray us again? You don't, Harry replied honestly. You'll have to trust me, or not trust me. But either way, you need to learn to defend yourselves. Silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, Luna rose from her chair. I'm in, she said calmly. My father always said that the best thing against Nargles is unity. Me too, added Neville unexpectedly. If there's a chance to learn to protect others. One by one the students began to nod. Even those who had initially looked at Harry with mistrust understood. There was no alternative. The last to agree was Ron. All right, he said heavily. But on one condition. If you let us down, if this turns out to be a trap, I'll personally make sure you regret it. Agreed, Harry nodded. Thus was born Dumbledore's army of this world. Though here it was created not in honor of the headmaster, but as a symbol of resistance against tyranny. The following weeks flew by in intensive training. 3 times a week, late in the evenings, Dumbledore's army gathered in the room of requirement. Harry taught them everything he knew, from simple shield charms to complex combat spells. To his own surprise, he found that this brought him joy. Watching Neville create his first stable shield, seeing Luna master the stunning spell, helping Dean Thomas overcome his fear of combat magic. Even his relationship with Ron gradually improved. The red-haired boy still didn't trust Harry completely, but at least he'd stopped looking at him as an enemy. "You've changed," Ron said one evening after a particularly intensive training session. They had stayed behind alone to tidy the room after the lesson. "In what way?" "You've become more real. These past months, you were like an actor playing a role. But now," Ron shrugged, "now you're like the Harry I remember from the early years." The Harry he remembered? Harry looked at Ron in surprise. "What was I like then?" "Kind," Ron replied simply. "A bit naive, but kind. You always tried to help, even when it was dangerous. But then something changed." He fell silent, staring at the floor. "When exactly?" Harry asked quietly. "After third year. You became colder, more calculating. Started talking about practicality and realism. And then completely." Ron waved his hand. "Third year. That was when the local Harry had finally absorbed Slytherin values. That was when he'd stopped being a boy who believed in justice and became one who believed in power." "Ron," Harry began carefully, "what if I told you I remember myself differently? That I remember you and me and Hermione being best friends?" Ron looked at him in surprise. "We were never best friends, Harry. Acquaintances, yes. Even mates in first and second year. But best friends?" He shook his head. "You chose a different path." Pain pierced Harry's chest. Even here, even now, when he was trying to fix everything, the past wouldn't let him go. "What if I had a chance to change that?" he asked. "To go back and make us truly friends? But at what cost?" Ron looked at him intently. "Harry, there are no free miracles in life. If something seems too good to be true, then it usually is," Harry finished. They worked in silence, clearing away the last traces of training. But Ron's words stuck in Harry's head. At what cost? He knew the answer. The cost would be betraying the trust of people who had finally begun to believe in him. The cost would be the suffering of innocence. The cost would be becoming a monster for the sake of saving his own soul. But the alternative was disappearing forever, the absorption of the real Harry's personality from this world. And that too was a kind of murder. Returning to his lonely dormitory that night, Harry felt the weight of decision pressing on his shoulders. Time was running out. Snape had warned that each day made the merging of personalities more irreversible. And somewhere in the Ministry, Hermione of this world was suffering for a crime she hadn't committed. Suffering because of him. Perhaps it was time to pay the price. Outside the window, the December wind howled between the castle towers, like the souls of all those who had died in this cruel world, where truth had become a crime and lies the only way to survive. But Harry no longer wanted merely to survive. He wanted to live. And for that, he needed to make the hardest choice of his life. January arrived with bitter frosts and news that stunned the entire school. Hermione Granger had been transferred from the Ministry to St. Mungo's Hospital in critical condition. The official version was an accident during experimentation with unpredictable magic. The unofficial truth, which quickly spread in whispers through the corridors, was far more horrifying. Harry learned the details from Snape, who summoned him to his office under the pretense of discussing his lag in potions. "She has finally been transferred from the Ministry to the hospital," said Snape without preamble as soon as the door closed. "But too late. What does that mean?" "Months of the imperious curse used by the Ministry have done their work. Her memory is partially erased, her magic unstable. The healers don't know if she'll ever fully recover." Harry felt the world sway around him. Hermione, the cleverest person he knew, the person whose memory was like an impregnable fortress, now lay in hospital with a broken mind. "This is because of me," he whispered. "Partly," Snape didn't deny it, "but the main blame lies with those who gave the orders. You only gave them a pretext. What difference does it make?" Harry sank into his chair, feeling his legs give way. If you hadn't done it, they would have found another pretext," Snape interrupted. "People like Hermione Granger couldn't be left at liberty in their new world. Sooner or later her turn would have come." But these words brought no comfort. Harry stared at his hands, the same hands that had written the report that destroyed Hermione. "Professor," he said quietly, "the time has come, hasn't it?" Snape was quiet for a long time. "You know it has," he finally replied. "Time truly has come. The longer you wait, the more you risk losing yourself completely. I thought I had already committed that cruel act. That betraying Hermione was enough." "No," Snape shook his head. "What you did to Hermione was the mistake of a person who didn't yet fully understand himself in this world. The artifact demands more conscious, deliberate betrayal of those who trust you most now." At these words, something cold slithered down Harry's spine. He understood what Snape meant. Dumbledore's army, he whispered. Those who have finally believed in you, who have entrusted you with their lives, their safety, who consider you a leader and friend. Harry closed his eyes, feeling nausea. I can't do it. Then you'll stay here forever. Absorb the soul of the local Harry Potter. Become a killer not only of the body, but of the soul. What if I find another way? If such a way existed, you would have found it already, Snape said softly. Harry, sometimes in life there are no good choices. There are only less terrible ones. That evening in the room of requirement, all members of Dumbledore's army gathered. The mood was grim. The news about Hermione had affected everyone. Ron sat silently, staring at the floor. His eyes were red from tears he had tried to hide. How is she? Luna asked quietly. Alive, Ron replied hoarsely. But not the same as before. The healers say she was lucky to retain even part of her memory. Neville clenched his fists. They'll pay for this. Everyone who did this. Revenge won't bring anything back, Harry said quietly. But we can make sure this doesn't happen to others. He looked at the assembled faces, all these young people who had entrusted him with their safety, who believed he could protect them. And among them was Ron, who had finally begun to look at him as a true friend. Today we'll study defense against mind control spells, said Harry, drawing his wand. The next 2 hours he taught them occlumency, sharing knowledge about how to protect one's mind from intrusion. Every spell, every piece of advice could save someone's life. When the lesson ended and most students had dispersed, Ron lingered. Harry, he said when they were alone, I want you to know, I'm not angry with you about Hermione anymore. You shouldn't forgive me. No, listen. Ron placed a hand on his shoulder. I see how you're torturing yourself. I see you're doing everything possible to fix the situation. And I'm beginning to remember the Harry you used to be, before everything went wrong. These words pierced Harry's heart with pain sharper than any curse. Ron, we could be real friends, you know, continued the red-haired boy. If everything had worked out differently, if you had made different choices back in 3rd year, what if I had a chance to change everything? Harry asked quietly, to go back to the past and do everything right. Ron smiled sadly. Then I'd say that life doesn't give second chances. But if it did, if it really did, then I'd be happy to call you my best friend again. Harry felt his eyes fill with tears. He embraced Ron tightly, perhaps for the last time. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. When Ron left, Harry sat for a long time in the empty room of requirement, staring at the dying fire. The plan was ripening in his head, terrible, necessary plan. The following week he began to act. First, small things. A casually mentioned meeting time in Pansy Parkinson's presence. She was still close enough to slither in circles. A suspiciously left map of the castle with marked secret passages on his desk during potions class. A seemingly forgotten list of Dumbledore's army members on his table during a lesson. Each action tore his soul apart. Every crumb of information passed to the enemy was like a knife thrust into his own heart. Pansy initially regarded his carelessness with suspicion. But when Harry began dropping subtle hints that he was reconsidering his position, that he was tired of being an outcast, she began to listen more attentively. Do you really want to come back? She asked one evening when they accidentally met in the library. I want to stop warring with myself, Harry replied, putting all the fatigue and pain that had accumulated over months into his voice. Want to stop fighting the whole world? Pansy nodded with understanding. Draco would say it's time, she said quietly. He always believed you'd come back to us. And you? I hoped you would. That night Harry wrote a letter. Not to Umbridge. That would be too simple, too obvious. He wrote directly to Lucius Malfoy, using Draco's owl and his personal seal. In the letter he told about Dumbledore's army, about their meetings, about what they were learning, about their plans. But most importantly, he gave complete information about when and where the next meeting would take place. He signed the letter as one who repented. 3 days later, everything was ready. Harry came to the room of requirement 10 minutes earlier than usual. The room looked as always, cozy armchairs, fireplace, books on shelves. The perfect place for learning and friendship. The perfect trap. Neville arrived first, punctual as always. Then Luna, followed by Dean Thomas with several other Gryffindors. Finally Ron appeared, smiling at the sight of Harry. Ready for a new lesson? He asked. Yes, Harry replied, feeling something tear in his chest. Today's lesson will be special. When everyone had gathered, 23 members of Dumbledore's army who had entrusted him with their safety, Harry rose from his chair. "Today we'll study the most important lesson," he began, looking at the expectant faces. "A lesson about trust." "Trust?" Dean looked puzzled. "Yes, trust and betrayal. About how to recognize an enemy who pretends to be a friend." Something in his tone made several students wary. Ron frowned, studying Harry's face. "Harry, are you all right?" "No, Ron. I'm not all right. And I haven't been all right this entire time." The doors to the room suddenly burst open. Umbridge appeared in the doorway accompanied by a dozen Aurors. Behind them loomed the figure of Lucius Malfoy, his gray face expressing cold satisfaction. "At last," squeaked Umbridge. All members of the illegal organization assembled. Chaos erupted instantly. Students reached for their wands, someone screamed, someone tried to flee to the far corner of the room. But the Aurors were ready, shield charms blocked all exits. Ron spun around to face Harry, shock and understanding gradually changing to horror in his eyes. "You," he whispered. "You betrayed us." "Yes," Harry said quietly, looking directly into his eyes. "I betrayed you." "Why?" Harry felt something finally and irrevocably tear in his soul. The last remnants of the local Harry Potter's personality, those fragments that still clung to this world, vanished in a whirlwind of pain and betrayal. "Because I'm not who I pretend to be," he said, feeling silver light begin to shimmer around his body. "Because I never belonged to this world." The light became brighter. The artifact, a silver serpent biting its own tail, materialized in the air before him, pulsing with the energy of betrayal received. "Farewell," whispered Harry, looking at the confused, pain-filled faces of those he had just betrayed. "Farewell, Ron. Forgive me if you can." The last thing he saw before the world dissolved in a silver whirlwind was Ron's face. Not angry, not indignant, but sad. Infinitely sad, as though he had lost something precious forever. And then everything vanished. Harry awoke on the cold stone floor. For long minutes he simply lay there, staring at the ceiling and trying to breathe. His heart was beating as though it wanted to leap from his chest. His mouth tasted of blood and bitterness. Slowly he sat up. Around him was the same room where it had all begun, the dark wizard hideout near Norfolk. But now the room was empty, and the silver serpent lay on the floor, split in half. "Potter!" The voice of his partner, Auror Kingsley Shacklebolt, came from the corridor. The sound of approaching footsteps. "Here! I'm here!" Harry called out, trying to get to his feet. Kingsley burst into the room, wand at the ready. "Thank Merlin, you're alive. You disappeared for 48 hours. We thought 48 hours. In that world he had spent months, but here less than 2 days had passed. "I'm fine," Harry said, but his voice sounded foreign even to himself. "What happened? What was that artifact?" Harry looked at the broken serpent. "Ouroboros, a magical mirror of realities. It shows what you could have become under different circumstances." "And what did you see?" Harry was quiet for a long time. "Myself," he finally replied. "The way I never would want to be." On the way home, he was silent. Kingsley tried to draw him into conversation, but Harry just stared out the window, lost in his own thoughts. What had happened to that world after his disappearance? Had the students managed to escape? Had Umbridge punished them for participating in Dumbledore's army? Had Ron forgiven him in his heart? He would never know the answers to these questions. But one thing he knew for certain: every day gifted to him by this terrible experience, he would treasure his real world. The world where he had grown up in Gryffindor, where his best friends were Ron and Hermione, where he had learned that true strength lay not in dominating others, but in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Harry hoped that his sacrifice, the sacrifice of 23 trusting souls, had not been in vain. The silver serpent was broken, the mirror of realities shattered forever. But the memory remained, and the lesson it carried would accompany him to the end of his life. Sometimes the most terrible enemy looks at you from the mirror, and sometimes the only way to defeat that enemy is to become him for a moment, in order to remain yourself forever. The day after his return, Harry stood before the door of a cozy house on Grove Street, clutching a bouquet of red roses and a box of Honeydukes chocolates. He couldn't wait. After everything he had experienced, he needed to see them, real, alive, whole. The door opened after the first knock, and Ron appeared on the threshold, his real Ron, with freckles on his nose and a surprised smile. "Harry, what are you doing here? Weren't you supposed to be at work? Kingsley said you had an important case." "There was one," Harry replied, embracing his best friend with such force that he nearly lost his balance. The embrace was warm, strong, real. just as he had dreamed of during those terrible hours in the alternative world. "Hey, are you all right?" Ron felt the desperation in his friend's embrace. "You look like you've been run over by the night bus." "Hermione, look who's come." Ron called into the house, not letting Harry go. Hermione emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a tea towel. She was dressed in a house dress, her chestnut hair was loose, and in her eyes shone that same intelligent kindness Harry had feared he might never see again. "Harry? In the middle of the day. What's happened?" she asked with concern. Instead of answering, Harry embraced her tightly, pressing her to him as though afraid she might disappear. His shoulders shook with emotions he could no longer contain. "Harry, you're frightening me," Hermione said quietly, but embraced him in return. "What happened? Tell us." "Everything's all right now," he whispered into her hair. "Everything's finally all right." Ron and Hermione exchanged worried glances. Something serious had happened to their best friend. "Come, sit down." Hermione took his hand and led him to the living room. "I'll make tea. You look like you haven't slept all night." They sat on the sofa, Harry between his two best friends, and for a long time simply remained silent. Hermione held one of his hands. Ron placed his hand on Harry's shoulder. Such simple support, such ordinary touches, but after the alternative world they seemed like the most precious treasures. "I thought I'd lost you," Harry finally whispered. "Us? But we're here. Always here," Hermione said in surprise. "I know. Now I know." He looked at them both. "Do you know that you're the best friends anyone could have?" "Well, of course," Ron tried to joke. "We're geniuses." Hermione nudged him with her elbow, but she was smiling too. "And do you know we'll never leave you?" she said seriously. "Whatever happens, whatever the circumstances." Harry felt his eyes fill with tears. "Even if I did something terrible? Something unforgivable?" "Especially then," Ron replied without hesitation. "Harry, we went through a war together. Do you think anything could be worse?" "Yes," Harry said quietly. "Betrayal." Hermione reached across the table and placed her palm on his hand. "Then it's good that you'd never betray us," she said with such certainty that Harry nearly cried. If only she knew. If only they both knew what he had been capable of in another world, under different circumstances. But they didn't know, and he would never tell them. Instead, he would prove every day that he was worthy of their trust. That the real Harry Potter wasn't the one who had betrayed Dumbledore's army in the alternative reality, but the one sitting at this table with his best friends in the world. "Can I stay with you today?" he asked. "I don't want to be alone." "Of course." Hermione immediately responded. "You can always stay. This is your home too." Home. Yes, this truly was his home. Not Privet Drive, not Grimmauld Place, not even Hogwarts. Home was wherever he was loved unconditionally. "And now tell us what happened," Hermione insisted. "You come in the middle of the day, embrace us as though we've risen from the dead." Harry was quiet for a long time. How could he tell them about the alternative reality? About what he could have become? About betrayal, cruelty, about the world where they had been enemies? "I learned something about myself," he began carefully. "About what I could have been under different circumstances. And it made me reconsider everything." "Such as what?" Ron frowned. "Such as how grateful I am to you. How important it is to have people who love you simply for who you are. Who will never leave you." Hermione squeezed his hand tighter. "Harry, whatever happened during that assignment, remember, we're always here. Always. Even if I had done something terrible?" he asked quietly. "Especially then," Ron answered without hesitation. "Mate, we went through a war together. Do you think anything could frighten us?" If only he knew. But Harry didn't say this aloud. Instead, he simply nodded and allowed himself to relax in the warmth of their friendship. All day he didn't move more than a few meters from them. He helped Hermione prepare lunch, listened to Ron's stories about the twins' new pranks at the shop, simply enjoyed their presence. Every smile, every joke, every ordinary word was medicine for his wounded soul. In the evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Hermione suddenly said, "You've changed." "In what way?" Harry tensed. "You've become appreciative. You look at us as though seeing us for the first time, or as though you're afraid we might disappear." Harry involuntarily squeezed her hand tighter. "Sometimes you need to almost lose something to understand how precious it is," he said quietly. That night he fell asleep on their sofa, refusing to go to his own flat. He fell asleep to the sounds of his friend's quiet conversation, to the crackle of the fireplace, surrounded by the warmth and love of his true family. And for the first time in 48 hours, though for him it had been months of hell, his dreams were peaceful. The silver serpent was broken forever. The mirror of realities no longer showed terrible possibilities. Only reality remained, the single, true, precious reality where he was loved and where he loved in return. And that was enough. More than enough.